high atop the pastoral center of the Diocese of Camden, you're listening to Talking Catholic.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Talking Catholic. This is your co-host, Mary McCusker, joining the podcast for the first time in almost 4 months now. And I'm joined by Mike Walsh, as always.
I know, sadly, as always. No, I know, it's amazing. For our listeners who may have been wondering why you've heard a lot of me solo this over the last 3 months, and you've heard a lot more of Don Ottaviano Britt and Marianela Nunez and Carrie Janice, my regular co-host. It's because we've been down a co-host for almost the entirety of 2021.
No one's noticed. Let's be real.
Well, I'll tell you this. I've noticed because it's been a lot more work trying to schedule all these things, and we've been Catholic Charities deficient. The last time we had a Catholic Charities perspective on was when we had Brian Corbin from Catholic Charities USA on.
That's right.
On January 16th. I think that one came out. And then mere moments later, you were felled by COVID for months. You were, and not the I got a bad headache, I have to go to the hospital now a couple of times.
Yeah. It was pretty scary. And you're right. It was just a few days after that I found out that I was exposed from a friend who was actually more careful than I was. And you know me, Mike, I was really, really cautious.
Yeah, I know. That's the thing that was so amazing. It was like, if I figured the person with the least likely chance to get it was you because you were so careful about
People
that
were telling me I was paranoid, but, I still ended up with it.
Yeah. And we should say that you are a very healthy 27-year-old, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for the most part.
Yeah.
I do have an autoimmune condition called lupus, but other than that, I'm completely healthy. And I found out I was exposed, and luckily I hadn't been around the office. I hadn't been around anybody, so I was able to quarantine. And everything was, I don't want to say fine. I felt a little bit sick, but then around day 7 or 8, I had to go to urgent care. They sent me to the emergency room. They admitted me into the hospital. And then I think there were 2 other ER visits after that. And I don't even know how many follow-up appointments ever since. But long story short, I'm really, really lucky. I had follow-up blood work done the other day. And the lady drawing the blood said something like, so, what was it like? I said, it was a nightmare. And she came back and said, well, at least you woke up from it.
That's true.
So I took that to heart. It was really, rough being in the hospital and isolated, and everybody's coming in in what looks like hazmat suits. You can't even see who you're talking to, and, you're alone and scared and don't know what's happening. And it's a disease that people are still trying to figure out. So It was a very, very scary time.
Well, it was for us too, because we're constantly worried about you and making sure that you were going to be okay and stuff like that. Because quite frankly, you don't seem to understand just how much we rely on you here, that we can't allow you to get ill like this. So I'm happy to report that she did get vaccinated. She's one shot into it.
Yep, next one's tomorrow.
Yeah, and so hopefully
Mike being nice. What a change.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could call it nice or you could call it selfish. A lot of us had to do a lot of work. You have no idea.
I'm really sorry for that. I did miss work more than I ever thought I could ever miss work ever.
Yeah, I mean, you were great because you were doing a lot of work from home for us as well. But as I was thinking about the podcast today, I was thinking, you know what? It took I can count at least 5 people to pick up all of the work you do between Catholic Charities and the communications office of the Diocese of Camden. So, we cannot allow you to go out like that because you are entirely too useful to the diocese and to Catholic Charities.
Well, that's nice of you, Mike.
No.
I'll note, too, that it wasn't just COVID. It was pneumonia that I developed afterwards. That was the real
That was the thing
killer.
that really took you out. Yeah.
So, but like I said, I'm lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back. There's a few small lingering effects, one of which is my head isn't quite right. My attention span's shorter, and I'm definitely rusty on this podcast, so
Well,
I was a little bit nervous for the first time back.
You haven't done it for 3 months, so I think you're allowed to be a little bit nervous. But we decided to make it easy for you, so we're actually recording in person, so that's always nice. We're actually recording at Catholic Charities in Camden, which is always a pleasant thing. And we invited onto the program somebody I've wanted on the program for forever. forever. Someone I think you've wanted on the program for forever, and we've never been able to get on the program for forever.
And
but
it's a mystery why. I don't know how, but every time something seemed to happen.
and it's one person that the two of us are both very fond of, like all the time.
Yep.
I mean, we have never have anything but the most wonderful things to say about this woman, and yet we've never had her on the show. So we finally have her on the show, and it makes me very happy.
Yes.
So, Mary, who is on the show with us today?
We have Melissa Hruska, and she has been with Catholic Charities for a while, long before me, and she's just one of the best, most competent people there is. So welcome, Melissa. And she's the program director for more things than I can even count. And
has been too. I mean,
yes.
Worked on a number of different programs. So, Melissa, for our listeners, what is it that you do here at Catholic Charities?
Well, thank you for finally having me, I will say, and flattery in person really does pay off, so I appreciate that. So I do a handful of things. I am overseeing 2 of our family community centers, Atlantic County and Cape May County, and the funding streams that are coming through there. I have also recently become the parish connections person, Vitality. I have the Atlantic City Electric program, which is almost expended, I will say, just in case there's any listeners curious. And then kind of you just fill in the gaps, right? There's internal programs or internal groups, I would say, and meetings that we have. Disaster. I still do actually have some Hurricane Sandy things going on. Not many would think after 8 years. That's what brought me here, and it is also what I'm still working on. Wow. So, yeah.
So maybe let's start there. Let's talk about Hurricane Sandy a little bit. So let's see, what was that, 2012 that first hit?
October.
So how do you become involved with Catholic Charities / the Hurricane Sandy Relief Program?
Okay, so a little bit of the funny personal part of that. So I had just ended some business communications with a construction company that was like a family-owned business, and decided, I think I'm just ready to do something different. And a neighbor of mine was volunteering with Catholic Charities at the local parishes for the Hurricane Sandy immediate response. And I thought, wow, that sounds so cool, right? It's not construction, it's different. So she made some connections and got me an interview for a case management, which I did not actually even get a call back for. And then oddly enough, about six to 8 weeks after, when the actual Hurricane Sandy funded program came through, they had looked at my resume, saw the construction experience, and brought me on as the administrative assistant for that current supervisor. And so somehow my for-profit construction world of I'm going to get away from this brought me right back into it, but beautifully into a completely different realm. So I learned a lot more about construction than I thought that I would. But that's how I got here.
Well,
I never knew that.
Well, that once again, that goes back.
I ran away and fell right back into it. They dodged me for case management and brought me back to what I was running from. And 8 years later, you still got me.
Yeah.
Well, that's a credit to the executive director here, who has a habit of finding great talent out in the real world and bringing them in to do that, to give that real world experience. Not that, and I don't mean to say Catholic Charities isn't a real world experience. I mean, there's for profit and not for profit. And we were certainly not for profit. And sometimes finding expertise like that in the not for profit world can be very difficult. So being able to bring somebody in with that perspective really makes things so much easier when you have to do stuff like that.
That's right. And Melissa is actually, I don't know if I made this up, or if somebody else did, but I'm going to take credit for it. The master of disaster, we like to say, because of her experience in managing disasters, especially Hurricane Sandy, which I know because of Melissa and the team she worked with, a ton of donations came pouring in from all over the country. Catholic Charities USA was involved. And, Melissa, can you tell us about Hurricane Sandy? What was it like on your end? We all remember it, but from a disaster case management perspective, what was it like?
So personally, coming into it, I was so freaked out. I had never, I mean, I've always worked in the for-profit world, and construction had become like very known for me, but coming into nonprofit, disaster, you hear about it on the news, and even my own personal experience, I lived in what everybody calls the Cape May bubble. So, it's a couple down tree limbs. You kind of look around, you're like, okay, this wasn't that bad. You see the news and it's like, yeah, that's the news. And then all of a sudden I started here and looking at the overwhelming numbers of people displaced from their home and, all of those memories that a lot of times you don't really think about. It's like, oh, well, it's stuff. It's wood, it's windows, it's, a TV, it's your sofa. But for so many, as you really start to listen to those stories, it's the last sofa they sat on with their husband, or, all of their kids are graduated and they're empty nesting. And, that's where they brought their kids home from the hospital. And, it's just all of those things that when you look at so many individual families and needs kind of piling up, a lot of times you can get lost looking at things. It's a bunch of files on your desk and it's a lot of work. And looking at how many individual actual families and sad stories and endless need with not an endless amount of money. And we had a massive amount of money coming in for Sandy. It was huge for us. As a state, not just as Catholic Charities or, as a team, but, so many of those families still aren't even home. And we ended up, we had caseloads individually at like 100 families at a time.
Oh my gosh.
Some very short term, some people were very fortunate. They needed appliances, or there was a short flood, they got furniture, and then there was their homes are literally destroyed. And we had a lot of those that just lingered, 4 years they were open until the program ended. But we oversaw, I think it was just under 2,300 individual homes and families that we had worked with, and somehow connected to some level of a resource. So
and it hasn't ended. That's the amazing thing, is that the
My
Superstorms.
mind was blown when she said that the other day at a meeting.
So what services are we still providing?
So we are not providing any type of real direct service. We were very fortunate not many months ago that there had been a small amount of money that was found, somehow, or, extra provided or didn't get spent. Sometimes checks just don't get cashed. Not internally at Catholic Charities. This was external. And it was offered to us to spend. And luckily, we've had a really great working relationship, both because of Sandy, but because of the housing counseling program that Navicor. I was working closely with them and had sat in some meetings through our VOAD and have been able to have discussions.
VOAD, just in case our listeners
voluntary
don't know.
Organizations Active in Disaster. So like we were talking about with those hats, that is still something I'm very active in. Yeah. It's always the preparation, the blue sky, in case the disaster comes, let's be ready. A lot of people tend to not think of how much work goes into a lot of things when it's not actually happening, but that's why sometimes it happens and we're ready, is because we spent 3 years without a disaster actually preparing for the possibility that one comes. But so we were sitting at the same tables and we accepted the money knowing that there was still a significant amount of people, not only statewide, but specifically in Atlantic County, that are still not even home.
Wow.
Money, yes, will actually, we are currently working with a family, and that funding will contribute to actually bringing that family finally home for the first time in 8 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I'm hoping that, everything that needs to work out for the family will work out and we'll be able to do that. But 8 years later,
Wow.
we're resurfacing again.
And so most of the families were in Atlantic County, you said, including our office. Was that impacted at all?
We luckily did not have any type of disaster impact as far as like damage from the storm. We had, I think, just the mental overexertion. Even the staff that were not part of the disaster team were dealing with a lot of people coming in, the increase of food needs, the increase of temporary shelter needs, especially because it takes so many months before disaster funding comes through. Every other funding source feels that burden. So no physical, like property damage, but definitely felt the effects in the office.
And that's something that Catholic Charities USA and their disaster relief efforts, they seem to be very cognizant of the fact that when there is a disaster somewhere in the country, the staff are impacted as well, which is why they have such a vibrant network of people who are ready, like Melissa, to be deployed, to, come in and, really help with organization and immediate recovery.
Have you been deployed elsewhere on behalf of Catholic Charities?
I have not.
I have
many opportunities. I know. I've had so many opportunities, and for one reason or another, whether it be personal or just things going on, the timing has not worked out.
I have a sneaking suspicion that's going to end sometime in the near future.
I do
because she's got too much ability, too much inherent knowledge to not be moved around. And quite frankly, let's face it, Mary, we've talked on this podcast many times that's in many ways the hallmark of this particular Catholic Charities office is that when it comes to disaster, you guys know how to go places. Even you have been through disaster training, as I recall.
Yes, and Melissa was there as well. And she actually, I know you ran a workshop, Melissa. Do you remember what the topic was? I mean, she could teach it.
I did not run the workshop. I was just a panelist in the workshop, but it was a disaster case management 101, I believe, was the subject matter for that. But that was actually with a wonderful woman from CCUSA, and then a great contact through the Beaumont Catholic Charities office. So they led that, and I was a panelist. Yes.
And that whole training was so informative. The things that you wouldn't even guess about disasters, like me, I'm in marketing and communications, and I was kind of thinking, why am I being sent here? What could I possibly learn? But the truth is, everybody, no matter what position, can have a place when it comes to disasters. And can you tell us about you mentioned preparation? That's a lot. I think a lot of people forget how much goes into disasters. It's not just responding, it's preparing for it. So can you tell us a little bit about that, whether it's Sandy or in general,
Sure. So there are, logistically to say, there are meetings that happen regularly. Some meetings are still happening statewide, even looking at COVID as a disaster and the crisis that is. There's weekly meetings, there's monthly, there's bi-monthly, there's a yearly conference coming up actually this month that all focuses on continued disaster training. And part of the trainings and the reason for the meetings for the preparation is that we're all still coming together. So many faces change. It's grant funded. Right. So people kind of come flooded in and then they're flooding out. And unfortunately, a lot of that experience and a lot of the knowledge that you get over the time of response leaves and goes somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those positions do not have the luxury of being part of a disaster if one strikes and they're still actually part of a different nonprofit agency. So part of what we do in the VOEDs, co-eds throughout the state are still continuing to bring awareness of not only Sandy, but other active disasters that have taken place, the needs that they have, reaching out to the agencies to say, if a disaster was to hit, what would your response be? Mm-hmm. Who do we call? Because people change all the time. Keeping up with a contact list of staff that just interchanges is almost a full-time job in itself sometimes. Yes. So that is a huge part of what we continue to work on is presentations to bring awareness of what disaster is and how to be prepared, whether it be a parish or your own agency, and then also keeping that community networking with all of the agencies, whether for-profit or nonprofit, that would be coming to the table, that have an interest to come to the table, and what would they be bringing if it was needed.
Sure.
So.
And there's so many different hands in disaster case management. So I'm guessing you'd have to be knowledgeable about navigating, government funding and, this group and that group. And so is that something, I feel like you have good relationships with a lot of these people and a lot of it's relationship building. And is that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the better relationships you have, the easier it is to pick up the phone and, pull a favor. So
no one will say no to Melissa. She'll find a way.
Yeah, I don't know about not saying no, but most of the time they at least say it nicely. But I think that's kind of part of, to go back to what you said just about this agency too, and deployments and opportunity. We are very fortunate in the positions that we have here, because even though Hurricane Sandy ended, my opportunity, the support from, Mr. Hickey himself, to continue being part of the VOADs, which is more of a voluntary thing. Not all agencies come to the table. If there was 100 agencies before, we're lucky we see 12. Yeah. So to be able to continue to be that person, even if it's not 100% of my time as it was, as much time as I feel confident that I can provide, he supports that to make sure that we're active at the table, ready to respond. And having the position that I do, luckily still within the counties and all 6 counties that we have, does keep me actively networking on a completely different page and responsibility with the same agencies. So kind of having that interweaving situation continues to make that easier too.
Yeah. And your position at Catholic Charities, and I think this goes for a lot of people who work for Catholic Charities, you end up becoming cross-program pretty quickly, because like any nonprofit, there's a lot of need and not a lot of staff, so you end up having to bounce around a little bit. So let's talk about some of the other things that you focus on. You had mentioned the parish coordinator, so that was something that just came up a few years ago in response to concerns that there was some miscommunication, misinformation between Catholic Charities, what Catholic Charities actually does, because every Catholic Charities office is a little different. Right. Every Catholic Charities region is a little different, so they don't necessarily offer all the things. So you may think that every Catholic Charities has a food pantry, but that may not be the case. There may be different things that are offered. So what is it that you do with the parishes? So
specifically, I am a point of contact. I'm the main point of contact that the parishes or St. Vincent de Paul's will call if they have a client or a situation that they're trying to handle, and I will then work with the case manager and try and come up with the best solution, whether it be programmatic. We always try, of course, because there's grants and funding, and look at, as a whole, what is the biggest impact we can have on that client and that need. And whether that starts at the program level and works its way down, of course, we have the blessings of having funding from JFA, we have donations. There's a lot of different ways we can be very creative with those cases. So we will work on that case, to the best of our ability, resolve what we can, and then I go back and have that discussion with the parish to see, is there a different loose end? Sometimes it's a collaboration, multiple agencies, other parish, and then bring it to resolvement. Yeah. So it's...
And for our listeners, listen, you're listening to a program right now with 3 people who work in this area all the time. So we will oftentimes fall into the trap of using the lingo to describe what it is that we do.
Acronyms.
The JFA is Justice for All dinner that
I didn't even pick up on that.
That Catholic Charities in the Diocese of Camden runs every year, and it makes anywhere from $130,000 to $150,000 a year, depending on the year. We were very happy that last year that even though we did one in a virtual setting, all online, which Mary McCusker should take a great deal of credit for all of the work she did to make it happen, which was amazing. It actually did a great job last year to raise important funds. And Mary, those funds are used how? Because it's a very unique program because it creates special kind of funding, right?
Right. It's not, it doesn't pay salaries or, rent or any. It is 100% for clients or direct client services. So that's a fund that'll, even not just during the JFA dinner time, but year round, people will like to donate to that, knowing that this money is going directly to people in need. It's not paying, salaries or overhead costs.
Yeah. It's 100% used by clients. It's not used for any administrative needs of any kind. So,
and you can see why a year like this past year, we really needed those funds and, continue to, especially.
So we're very thankful to everyone who donated this year. I think I forget what the final raise number was.
I don't want to say a number in case I'm wrong, but it was.
I know it was amongst the highest we'd ever had, which really impressed me that during a virtual. Usually it would be a Justice for All dinner that was held in Atlantic City every year. This year it was a Justice for All event that was posted on Facebook and YouTube, and so many sponsors kept their sponsorships and were a part of it, and still gave us the opportunity to highlight in it. We highlight our Disciples of Mercy, who are people from the parishes from just around the diocese who are doing great work, not necessarily work related to Catholic Charities, just great work in and of themselves in their communities, and gives us an opportunity to highlight them.
Right.
So we're already in the planning phase for Justice for All Dinner 2021, which we anticipate.
Spoilers yet.
Well, we are we think it could be an in-person event in Atlantic City in late October or early October. So we're fingers crossed, knock on wood, prayers are being said that will actually happen, because it is so incredibly supportive. And quite frankly, as a PR person, I just love being able to bring everybody together, and because so many of our sponsors come together, so many of the do-gooders in the community come together, so it's always a great event. So really is. so that led us back. That came from your connection to the parishes. So let's talk about your connection to Vitality. Now, that refers to Vitality Catholic Healthcare Services, which is a completely different entity within the Diocese of Camden. It's a group. It's actually an enormous group that runs probably 15 different programs, including chaplaincy and a number of other ones. But how do you sort of interact with Vitality?
So it's very similar to the parish program. I am the direct contact for the Vitality group, and we kind of do the same thing. They send the client, a description of what that need is. I work with the appropriate county or case manager, or if it's something I think I can resolve fairly easily myself, I try and not add more to the case manager's plate, and then I provide the same follow-up to them.
Yeah, Vitality Catholic Healthcare Services is unique in the sense that they have a 1-800 number for people in the communities. They don't have to be Catholic. Anybody who is in need or might have a family member in need, usually in the area of, they're having difficulty with a healthcare matter. So they're having a hard time with Medicare, Medicaid, or getting the kind of funding that they might need to take care of whatever the emotional or physical or medical issue that they're having. But occasionally what happens in those conversations is that we find that some of the clients have much bigger problems or more lengthy problems than just their medical health. And what we'll find is that some people are living in their car. I mean, famously, there's a story of that sort of this symbiotic relationship between Vitality Catholic Healthcare Services and Catholic Charities, where somebody called Vitality, was talking about their health issue, and as the case manager for Vitality was having the conversation with them, they found that sure enough they were living in their car, and the first thing they did was called over here to see if someone at Catholic Charities could be of help, and it was amazing. Catholic Charities, I think, had that person in an apartment within 24 hours, I think. Wow. So
you just described a story, and like 4 different clients came to mind off the top of my head.
Really? That's the thing.
That
it's the beauty of our
so
work.
Important. Yeah. Right. Because you have, Vitality, Catholic Charities, the St. Vincent de Paul societies, the parishes, and everyone's trying to help and do the best they can. And what Melissa's so good at is just figuring out, what's the best plan here? How do we all, in some cases, collaborate, or, I don't want to say delegate, but how do we all work together in a way that's efficient and best for the client? So that's a real talent.
Thank you.
Now, you've also been the director of some of the local offices too, right? So I know at one point you were the director of Gloucester County, and at another point Camden County and Atlantic County.
Not Camden.
I'm sorry, Cape May County.
Yes.
Cape May County. Sorry.
Cape May, Atlantic, and Gloucester.
You are a shore girl, so yes. I understand that. So what's that been like? How's that a little different than your?
So I would say that's a lot different. There's something to be said about trying to navigate, just making sure the doors are open, and there's a lot of pressure, good pressure, I don't mean that in a negative, form, but you take on a lot of pressure when you care about what you do. And being able to make sure doors are open, the right staff are in the right places, that clients are getting the experience, of what our mission is a lot of juggling. And crossing that much distance, I take big pride, at least I try to, look at being a supervisor is not that I'm watching what you're doing or telling you how to do your job. Supervisor to me equals support. And so trying to cover multiple different counties with different programs and juggling all of the little things, that we've done, quality assurance committees and, incident command groups, just to be ready for different things, trying to be so present for all of those, and then be in Gloucester in the morning to be in Cape May by the afternoon, and then, oh no, somebody's going home sick, but the other person was out sick too, so let me race up to Atlantic City, and I'm not going to be in that meeting, but you just start juggling. Like sometimes I think I've referred to, the position as kind of wearing a jester, like you're wearing like a jester hat. It's like, you wear many hats. No, I wear one. It's just the jester one, and the bells are falling off, and, the lines are a little tattered, but I still put it on every day. And
I always picture you just driving all over the place, like down the expressway.
There was a time where I kind of questioned, like, do I do anything else? Like, how do I actually get done what everybody says that I'm getting done?
But you do it.
My wheels are falling off, It's like you leave one morning, and by Friday, there's no tread left on your new tires, and you're like, wow, it was a busy week, And somehow you do. You get it done. So.
And those 3 counties, can you talk a little bit about how, on one hand, our mission is the same, the services are similar, but they're different. Can you talk a little bit about how, in your case, Atlantic, Gloucester, Cape May, about how they're similar or different?
Sure. The programs usually are the easiest way to look at the difference of what services are easier to provide. Gloucester County has county programs, that are kind of not easier, to fit people in, but it is for the basic everyday person. The glitch kind of happens, and you need, some assistance. It actually has a handful of housing programs. It has the HPP program, has the HPRP2 program. There's SSH there. Of course, there's access to JFA funding there. So it does have its own plethora of services. Mm-hmm. So when you have people coming in for that service, you have a lot of services you can look at.
Just out of curiosity, what is HPP?
Homeless Prevention Program.
Okay.
I did it again with the acronym.
And what was the other one? HPPSA?
HPRP.
I can't keep them all straight.
And then
Homeless Prevention Rapid Rehousing, social services for the homeless.
And SSH, eventually people started saying, the shush grant. And
right.
For years, I'm like, what on earth is the shush grant?
And even still, from one county to, like, Camden says the shush program, and we say SSH down there, and then you're just like, it is still the same thing, right?
Acronyms are a task to keep on top of.
But that's an interesting point, and I'll say that because I've lived in Gloucester County my entire life. Almost my entire life. I lived down the shore for a little while too. But you would not anticipate, most people who live in Gloucester County would not consider Gloucester County to be the place that is concerned with homelessness in any way. It is a very suburban, rural area. Now, at the risk of angering your executive director, Kevin Hickey, who hates it when I bring this up all the time.
Uh-oh.
Volunteers of America, which is another entity I worked for back in the day, I was working more directly with homeless shelters. And what blew my mind was that there was a homeless shelter 5 minutes from my house when I lived in Gloucester County, and you would have never guessed it. It was literally in a forest grove out in the distance, and it was a women's shelter, women's and family shelter. Mm-hmm. And it was beautiful. It was bucolic. It was unbelievable, actually. But you would have never imagined that it was there. So I always take this opportunity to remind people that homelessness is everywhere. You would not believe the places it exists, places you would think that there's no reason homelessness should be here, and yet it absolutely exists here. So I say that as my sort of my usual promotion for the fact of don't think that homelessness is
plug your hometown. We understand.
That too,
Everybody does it.
But it's true. Even when I was in Cape May County, it blew me away because when I was a reporter down there, I was like, why would there be homelessness in Cape May? And the resort mecca of Cape May County.
Right.
Well, yeah, the islands are resort meccas, but there's the inner part of Cape May County. There's a lot of need.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the other differences I was going to say between the counties. There's the programmatic differences of what that specific community center holds, but it's the population. Like you said, Gloucester would not expect there's this high level of homelessness and what the need for funding for that homelessness would be. and you wouldn't think it's there in Cape May, I think it's one of the hardest counties we have when it comes to homelessness. And not only the level of homelessness, but the number of people on unemployment, which when you're looking at programs and grant-funded systems that that comes with a level of criteria. And that criteria always falls around sustainability.
Right.
If you're unemployed, you are not falling under the sustainability criteria. And it makes it very hard to not be creative. You have to be creative. And so in my thought process of differences and what I might find challenging, it's adapting to the difference of every county for what it is, the people that you are trying to serve, and how to figure out how to do it. And that's the difference. Atlantic City is a beast in itself. It's busy, it's populated, you have a little of everything. It's kind of like you grab all of the counties together and take a little percentage of everything you can think of, and you have Atlantic City. So it
really is, from Hamilton to, Atlantic City itself to Pleasantville, and then like the really wealthy areas. It's a big mix. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes forget Atlantic County is beyond Atlantic City.
At Cape May, and I lived in Cape May my whole life until 3 years ago. I actually moved to Gloucester myself.
The mecca of everything that's awesome in South Jersey.
I hate to even say that and support your statements, but you got me. I did end up there. But Cape May, I remember thinking of like one of the significant pieces of being here outside of just that disaster focus. I remember being brand new. And of course you're nervous. It's nonprofit, it's all of these things. You hear stuff, and I'm in this, office, down in Cape May, the southern tip of everything forgotten. And then I remember standing there. Yeah, like you hear, all these names. At that time, Jen Dyer was here, and she comes with such a... And I'm like, oh my gosh. I remember being so nervous. I think she's absolutely lovely. I learned so much from her.
Great.
But, she's known for being very serious, and, things need to be. And then you hear that, there's Kevin Hickey, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, can I do this? You like start to get these little nerves, and like, so what do we do here? And I was figuring out so much and understanding the poverty in my own backyard. I grew up there. You're young, you don't see a lot of things. I was active in a construction business, that did a lot of work on the island. So thinking of people who were suffering, it wasn't in the forefront, of my everyday.
Right.
And so to be here, in that office, and I'm watching, and I saw a food truck pull up. I hadn't seen one. I mean, growing up as a child, if it's okay to say that, I did grow up in poverty, and we were evicted a lot. And, I grew up as that. But growing up into an adulthood, it was kind of like, well, that was just us. Like, because you didn't see it with anybody else. You kind of think you're that isolated anomaly and nobody really knows. And really, there's this whole population that had been going through the whole thing and is still fighting through that whole thing. But anyhow, so there's this food truck out front. And I remember sitting there and asking, the coordinator of the office at the time, like, what is that? And so I'm watching, and, she's explaining it to me. And I remember seeing this line of... It had to be 20 to 25 people.
Oh my gosh.
Single moms with these little babies in a stroller, and then elderly people. And I'm thinking, you have to be kidding me. You mean there's 70, 80 years old walkers in line for an hour before they're even handing out food because they had to hold their place. And I just stood there, and honestly, I cried. Like, I was like, wow, like this... One, I almost felt ashamed that I was so oblivious to the needs of other people. But to go through that experience, I feel like it was that moment that I really, truly understood what the mission of this agency was. And understanding Matthew 25 and kind of the discussions that we continuously have about that, coming into this agency, I didn't really know any of that. It wasn't personal. It didn't... I don't want to say it didn't mean anything to me, but I didn't understand it.
It's funny to hear you say that, because I grew up almost the exact same way. We weren't evicted from anywhere, but grew up with 2 teachers on teacher salaries in the 70s, so we weren't making a ton of money. We were living in this little town called Clayton, which is a lovely little town, but a little town called Clayton. I still remember standing in line for government cheese. I remember we didn't have sort of like you. I'm like, I don't remember it being tough, but I had nothing to compare it to when I was 7 years old. Now I'm looking back and I go, oh, wow, we really got lucky. But it's the same thing. Like, so in Glassboro, where I live, I forget which day of the week it is, but every day of the week, this giant semi comes up and they unload, and standing in line for hours on end, single moms, senior citizens, actually everybody. It runs the gamut. It really does. We shouldn't single out just 2 entities, because it really does run the gamut. And my wife, who doesn't work in this area, of like I remember the first time I took her to the homeless shelter that's in our town. She was completely blown away, because it was just an area, because we grew up, and I think most people grew up not turning a blind eye to that. We think of that as the thing that happens in Camden, which happens to be where we are right now. And certainly that the need in Camden is very great, and certainly a great deal more public. Right. But that need is everywhere. If that's the only thing you take away from this podcast, please take it away, knowing that the need is everywhere, and you are supported. And I didn't mean for this kind of come out like this podcast to be like this, but your support of places like Catholic Charities and Volunteers in America, and any place that does charitable giving like this, is really important, particularly when it comes to unrestricted funding, and that's where your donations are so important for. So yes, the state and the federal government have all these different grant options that are out there. The problem with those grant options and they're wonderful, thank God that they exist, but you're only allowed to use the money for that very specific need. So if it's for utilities, that money can only go to utilities, which is fine, that's a great thing. But that means when someone says, I can't feed my kids, that money can't be used for that. That's why the unrestricted funding that comes through fundraising is so incredibly important.
And like Melissa said, if you don't meet every last bullet point on a page-long checklist of criteria, you don't qualify for a certain grant or fund.
Right.
So that's where we pride ourselves on, being a charity, that we're not just any other government agency. We work with the clients themselves, and if they don't qualify for this, okay, well, let's work and figure out, how to overcome these barriers that they're going through. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was looking at Mary is the only co-host that I have that actually writes questions down.
No pressure. You actually get those the day before to ponder over.
You got them a day before? I got them 15 minutes ago.
I got it yesterday and asked her. I didn't even reply. I opened it and I thought, I am not even going to pressure myself. If I can't answer a question on this list, I probably shouldn't have been on this podcast and work here. Well, that's what I told myself to give me the confidence to actually be here today.
Yeah.
Well, you've been perfect so far, because we're 42 minutes in and we're up to question number 2. Oops. So
that's the secret way of saying stop talking so much.
No, that is not. Actually, that's what we want. That is the joy of the podcast. Because back in the old days when we weren't limited to 54 and a half minutes, we had 2-hour podcasts, but then sometimes we had half-an-hour podcasts. So there are days that I kind of miss that flexibility. I'm sure our listeners probably miss it too sometimes, when they were 30 minutes anyway. So what are some of the other key roles you've had in Catholic Charities? Or do we hit them all?
A short story, that kind of.
Okay.
Enter COVID. Can we do a quick? Now, when this first, we talked about the long lines in Cape May, but I'll never forget the first drive-by food distribution in Atlantic City, where Melissa was. Can you tell us about that day? Because I feel like that kind of sums up the whole
I feel like the only word, as I listen to you talk, that enters my mind is overwhelming.
Yeah. And it takes a lot for Melissa to be overwhelmed.
Thank you. And I do kind of tend to agree. Yeah. Like, I really do thrive in a structured chaos type of environment. And, I don't know if that comes from, like, mom life, professional life, the mix of the two. I'm not sure. But structured chaos is beautiful to me. So that day was not only overwhelming, but this was in the beginning of COVID. So there's and still, I know there's a lot of fear, and concern about exposures, but it was a very real thing at that time. And we didn't want to, cower away from still being responsive, that there's this huge growing need, and to be responding to that. And so we had those discussions and decided on these drive-bys and thought okay, appointments, right? Because that will keep this chaos structured. We'll have appointments. That'll be great. And only people with appointments are going to come to their appointment. That is not how that ended up in Atlantic City that day. We had, and I'll never forget, we had 43 appointments, and we did these in 2-hour increments. It was a 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. We scheduled these appointments to kind of safely flow, through the parking lot setting. And we had 189 people show up. That and a lot of them, were not even driving, because of the visibility of our office in such a specific location. Right. That word of mouth, it spread so quickly. And so there I was the one handling the walk-ups. I felt like, as the supervisor, you want to lead and by example. And so I'm going to take that part and feel like I can handle those, cautions and let them be comfortable, with the drive-ups and that system. And so there's this line of 100 and some people looking at me, and it was okay, one, how in the world do I get enough food bags ready to handle this many people without people getting frustrated? Or I think it was rainy that day too, which added to, help. Oh my gosh. And yet, somehow we did it. Under the same 2 hours, we provided food to 189 people, of which, 150 whatever of them were unexpected. And we got through, and I did cry a little after, because I was whoa, that was a lot of people. Yeah, right. In this midst of COVID and all of these fears and the fear of the unknown, which is usually where fear comes from. It's this unknown of the virus. And now I've been in contact, we had social distancing, but still that many people face to face kind of walking by. You're we didn't even know. Is it 6 feet? Yeah. Is it, how does this travel? How do you catch it? And then I'm and now I'm going to go home to my kids. Yeah. Okay. It's gosh. Wow. And then, so we're planning another one of these, It was interesting.
That I remember when that because it was in the early days of COVID. Nobody knew anything. We were all shut down. Everything was quarantined. We were all kind of doing our best not to freak out about it. And I remember Mary, you had taken photos from that event.
No, I didn't make it. Dave did.
Dave did. That's right. Yep. Dave took photos at that event. And I remember thinking to myself, because knowing the backstory and knowing how great a job you and everyone else had done, but you were all wearing masks. And I remember, oh man, every photo has them in a mask, which we should have this on a billboard somewhere. And I wanted everyone to see Melissa's face and everyone else's face that was a part of this. And the PR guy kind of kicked in, and I was darn it, those stupid masks. Right. But it was amazing, and it was Herculean, and it was successful, and it was an example of this kind of stuff that Catholic Charities, not just here, everywhere, does for people in need.
And not just Atlantic, all six of our counties did those same drive-bys, and we all had unexpected challenges, and some moments it was overwhelming, and yet everybody pulled through and showed up for the next one and creatively found ways to serve more people.
Not just with food, but with everything crisis that comes with the pandemic, which is pretty much every aspect
our normal
of life.
Daily practice, I think, has changed a lot in a lot of different ways from the ground up in order to get services to the people that need them.
Right. So, but we never closed down. We still operated because of people like Melissa.
Yep. So I'm going to steal one of Mary's questions, because I think it actually is a good way to wrap up the podcast in the last 5-7 minutes we have to go, which is, okay, I've been around case managers and people who work at Catholic Charities for a long time now, and I always say that I come here so I'll feel a little bit better about society, because it's always... sometimes the stuff I have to deal with, there's no joy in it. Yeah. But the stuff here, you guys really do make a big improvement in people's lives. I'm curious, what helps you with all of this? I mean, you've been doing this now for a long time. How do you stay energized and positive and able to do this?
It's kind of a loaded question. I think there's so many different ways that I've had the benefit of being able to do that. One, honestly, supportive leadership, support of other staff. Mm-hmm. We're not I'm not doing this alone. You know, we do this with an agency full of other people, and their experiences, their support, being able to pick up the phone, you know, and just say, like, I can't get my mind off of this case, or did I miss something, or, you know, and being able to do that and really feel, you know, at the end of the day, we can't resolve every problem. If we could, we probably wouldn't even need to be here, right? Because there wouldn't be problems. There's overwhelming, you know, problems. And to be able to talk to people about those and kind of your emotions in them isn't so much for me about being emotional and kind of talking about the icky parts, you know, of what we do. It's really feeling the confidence in myself that I am using all of the abilities that I have and all of the support that I have here to be blessed to help people. I mean, as hard as the days can get, you know, I've never felt so honored to be part of something as I am to work here. And I'm sure that sounds for somebody listening like sappy, and you get paid to be there, and you know, your boss might listen, but
yes, this stuff.
I really don't. But I mean, even going back to that story of the food truck, you know, that was that moment. And it wasn't to signify, you know, the moms with, you know, just the single parents or the elderly, because it is every part of the population. It's every demographic. It's every age group. It is everyone. And at any given point, any one of us can either fall back to the way you grew up or fall into a situation you've never seen before. And that moment for me of knowing that, one, was personal. I was a single mom, you know, so it was kind of like, wow, like it should not be that hard to feed your baby, you know? And after all of these years of life and working and raising families, like you should not be waiting for food. Like, wow, like I can't believe that's what this is. Because you kind of grow up, and I think it was easier, you know, years ago, you know, you thought homeless people were the people, like you said, in the big cities holding the sign, I'm homeless. And it isn't. It's people, you know, dressed in nice clothes, fighting for an interview. It's, you know, they're smiling in your face at the store and they're crying in their car because now they don't even have anywhere to go, you know, and it's just that moment, that was that reality for me. And over the course of 8 years and having all of the incredible opportunities that I've had here to grow as a person, to grow professionally, to just grow my children with that benefit and blessing of understanding, you know, we may not have everything, you know, but we have everything that somebody else might want, and don't take that for granted. And, you know, being here just really does that. Like I, again, hope it's okay to say, I get paid to do one of the most amazing gifts there is to give to people. And that is what our mission is. And that is what Matthew 25 is. You know, we are here to provide people with the opportunity to better their lives, not just pay their rent, not just, you know, feed their family, which is huge. I mean, when you get a hug from somebody because they didn't know how their kids were going to have dinner, that is a hug you never forget. And I've been very blessed to have several of those, you know, and it's those moments that even when you have the hard ones, it's those moments you hold on to that say, you know what, tomorrow's going to be a different day. And I'm here to make a difference, you know, and if it wasn't today with that specific family, maybe a new resource will be here tomorrow and I'll call them back, you know, but that's how I get through.
See, this is why I come to Catholic Charities.
I'm about to get teary-eyed. You gotta wrap it up, Mike.
No, I'm literally sitting here going, I'm like, so I was blessed to meet Melissa for the first time at the Catholic Charities annual gathering in Boston, which was the first I'd been invited by Mr. Hickey to go, and I'd never been anything around Catholic Charities, but the other thing was I was very new to the diocese, so I didn't really know anybody. I knew you, and I knew a handful of people, but I didn't know Melissa, and there was a bunch of other people on that trip that I had never met before. And during the course of the 4 or 5 days I was there, because I got to spend so much time with all these people, and, you know, personal time as well as professional time, I was just blown away by how wonderful they are. And so anyway, I don't get to see Melissa very often, but every time I do, I'm always kind of really impressed by her. So that last 2 minutes where she was sort of explaining herself, I'm sitting here going, oh, that's right. I've done 240 episodes of this podcast. Why did I take that long to get her on? She's so wonderful. I'm actually sitting here
dropping the ball.
how can I clip out parts of this podcast and put them up as social media bumpers for Catholic Charities over the next couple of things? Because it's important for people to realize that what you just heard Melissa say is basically the perspective of every single person that works here. It may not be said as eloquently, it may not be even said in that language, but it's how important it is that people like Melissa and all the other people we've ever had on at Catholic Charities over the years, how important it is that they're here doing the great work that is needed in our area. So Melissa, thank you very much for joining us today. It was absolutely my pleasure.
Thank you for finally having me 8 years later.
Yes, of course.
Like 11 different invites that I then got shunned.
My fault.
Well, I'm going to blame other people
but
for
I'm
that.
here. That's all that matters. I'm here, and thank you so much.
You're welcome. Mary, thank you very much for living and for making it back onto the podcast again.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks, everybody.